All right, good morning. You all survived the hurricane? I've heard that like 40 times. I'm like, I love that. It's gonna be a movie. You know, that's gonna be a movie at some point. Or down in San Diego, apparently they had like a huge spawn of tarantulas on top of the hurricane. So there was all these like memes about, tarantulas, like Sharknado, but with tarantulas, right? Like so many like wild things. Yesterday was kind of crazy, right? We were sitting in a restaurant eating, and all of a sudden the table started shaking. I was about to yell at my kids. I thought it was them. I was like, stop it, what's wrong with you? And then I saw the lights were moving too. And the people next to us freaked out and got under the table and were like screaming. It was ridiculous. We were just sitting there laughing, like, it's gonna be okay. It was eventful, right? But not as much rain and wind and stuff. Like, did anyone's power go out or anything like that? Like all the stores were like, people ransacked the stores, bought everything possible, and then it rained like a couple of inches, right? So typical of here, right? You never know. And then LAUSD is closed today. Our school always overreacts, so I'm surprised that they're open, but it's not barely even raining. So we made it. We made it through, but eventful. My roof leaked. That was as exciting as it got for me. My roof started leaking. Yeah. Anybody, anything interesting, anything eventful before we go on? I obsess about weather, so this was like super exciting about weather in August of all times, but now we're gonna move back to warm, I'm sure. Yeah.
I just found out that I work at a crystal shop.
Yeah.
And so we have like 20 to 40-pound rocks on shelves.
Oh, wow.
And so when the earthquake happened, they were just like falling off the shelves.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, so it was scary.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, let's like not do this. And then my owners were like, no, it's cool. I was like, oh. But then we just like took all the heavy stuff off of the shelves and anything, like down that could like break or anything. But yeah, it was a little scary just because it's like a lot of heavy stuff on top of things. So
yeah, you don't want to have a huge crystal fall on.
Yeah, no, that was all. I was like, oh, like someone could have gotten hurt.
Yeah.
No one did.
I was watching all the news stuff of Ojai. I mean, a lot of the stores in Ojai really got where the earthquake was out of. Really, everything fell. And so, I mean, we could feel it here, but yeah, that's scary, right? That's worthy of being on the news. Was that a hand? So there was a hand up. So. Oh, I thought somebody was. No. Anybody else? Anything else interesting? Or yeah.
Like before the hurricane.
Yeah.
And there were like literally
she's like, oh no.
There were like 500 snails on the grass. Like genuinely we looked down at the grass and we thought we were like, and we were like walking.
Yeah.
It's like
Oh,
so do you remember the place next to like the Starbucks and like the Valves? Okay, I was gonna say I think I've seen you there. I went across the street at Setmire. What? Do you remember it now? Yeah, okay. She's like from making
United. That's fun. I didn't know we had a crystal shop. My daughter would like lose her mind over that. My middle child loves crystals. We'd have to check that out. No. Well, hopefully it'll be uneventful from here. I mean, I'd be fine if it rained every day. That's my favorite weather. I hate when it's sunny. I'm in the wrong part of the world, I know. But we'll keep going, but glad we're all okay. Glad we're open and nothing's like damaged or anything like that. We'll pick up where we left off, right? So we got through most stuff related to kind of building up to where we are today, right? So we left off here, we went through the Islamic Middle East, the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment. We'll pick up with the Victorian era, and then we're going to watch part of a documentary today, which I think is really interesting. Just one or two slides before we get there. We talked about this last time, that we kind of have this like very progressive time and then a backward time, progressive time, backward time, right? So we ended here with progressive, and then we get to the Victorian era. The Victorian era is super interesting time, but very, very repressed, right? It is a very kind of a backward step from where we were before. Named after Queen Victoria, right, who took the British throne in 1837 to 1901. This was a time of self-restraint, of propriety, and like public behavior, repressing sexuality, repressing anything inappropriate. And women were viewed as completely asexual. Like sexuality wasn't something that you shared with anyone, right? Even within a marriage, there was supposed to be this distance, right? And at this time, husbands and wives slept in separate beds, Right? This was a very common thing in this era, all the way through like the 1950s. Husbands and wives were not allowed to sleep together in the same bed. And I remember very early in my relationship with my partner, we went up to visit her grandparents, and they put us in like their guest room, and it was 2 separate beds. And I was like, what's going on here? Like, why are you separating us? And I thought it was something like, I thought it was maybe just us, like, because they're not super supportive of our relationship. But then my in-laws went up there, and it was the same for them. So we took the beds off and put them on the floor. Like, they're not going to make us sleep separately. But this was super common at that time of making even husbands and wives sleep separate. People weren't having sex, or it was something that was hidden and secret. Interestingly, it was a time where prostitution absolutely took off because of it, right? So it was this idea that you couldn't be sexual, right? But people were very sexual. It was just hidden. It was a time of being very proper. And there was a lot of interesting things that came out of this time. And you'll see this in the film we're going to watch. The bicycle was deemed to be the ultimate threat to female sexuality. Like, if a woman sat on a bike, she would never go back. She'd never be the same. Right? Bicycles were considered like scandalous. Women weren't supposed to ride a bicycle because it would ruin them sexually forever, which is just kind of comical to think about. The bodice, or the corset, really embodies this period of time. Everything kind of buckled down and tight and hidden. It's a very, very common like portrayal of this time. Interesting too, Victoria's Secret, right? The store, Victoria's Secret, comes out of this time, right? Named after Queen Victoria. And the idea was that the secret is hidden underneath, right? The clothing, right? Like everything, again, being kind of secret and proper. But underneath all of that, a lot of prostitution, right? A lot of sexuality just hidden, not something that was public. If we move into the United States or the early Americas, we get the Puritans, right? So continuing on with this like very kind of backward, kind of tight, restricted period of time, the Puritans were very, very harsh when it came to sexuality. They had severe sanctions for any kind of sexual transgression. Like, sex within a marriage was good and proper, but outside of a marriage, not so much, right? If you engaged in any kind of positions other than like the missionary position for the purpose of procreation, you could be put to death. Adultery or cheating on a partner, incredibly severe crime. If you've ever read The Crucible, right, that's very much out of this period of time. And you see a lot of that like kind of strictness in there. We also get this really interesting practice called bundling. And this is comical, but it was so common at this time. Within the Puritan culture and kind of like mentality, we wanted to allow people who were going to get married to be able to share a bed with each other without being tempted to have sex. Because again, people didn't have sex before marriage at this point, or at least it was very, very uncommon and not talked about. So what we would do is we would allow like an engaged couple to sleep in the same bed with each other, but they had to practice a thing called bundling. Bundling was either this little board put in the middle of the bed, right, so that you couldn't touch each other. Not that you couldn't just go right over the board, right? But like, it was this board that was right there. Or they would put you in a sack that was sewed closed so that you wouldn't be able to move and touch the person next to you at night. I found a clip of this really interesting. If you've ever seen the movie The Patriot, it's an older movie, but they show a scene of this couple and the man gets sewed into a bag at night so that they can share a bed. So I'll play this for you. Again, kind of a comical idea. Like, it's such a funny idea, right? Like, if we put you in this little sack, you won't be tempted to like engage in any kind of sexual behavior at night. And obviously people got out of the bags, they went over the little bundling boards, right? But this was like a new practice. It was progressive. It was this idea that you could sleep together before marriage as long as you weren't having sex, right? And so it was kind of like a forward idea, even though it's kind of silly now, right? So the Puritans, again, like very like strict, but some kind of interesting new progressive ideas. If we look at the 1700s and 1800s in the United States, freedom and slavery, right? The influx of all of the slaves from Africa led to some really interesting and like restrictive ideas around interracial sexuality, right? We saw a lot of laws forbidding sexuality or marriage among people of different races, kind of a lot of politics starting to enter into who can have sex with who. And then in the 19th century, we start to get toward things like medical ideas around sexuality, social hygiene, right? How to take care of yourself and stay clean and avoid disease was something that was starting to come into focus, right? We get this idea of sexual health for the first time, something that was completely ignored before like the 1800s, 19th century. There was no such thing as sexual health, right? And now we're starting to focus on that a little bit and look at some things that you'll see in the film that we're going to watch next. So again, kind of as we build up to today and into like 20th and 21st century sexuality, we have all these different things kind of shaping what is normal. And it's different for every time and every place. And as we get to kind of closer to now, what we'll do for 20th century sexuality, as I said, I have a video for you. And I think it's really interesting because it's so different. They'll talk about the bicycle, they'll talk about the automobile, the things that we didn't know. And again, it's kind of comical to compare to today. So what I'm going to do, instead of talking about this slide, I put up some bullets. You don't need to take notes on the film, but definitely pay attention. I think some of the themes from it are things that are going to be helpful and kind of pop up maybe on the exam and so on. So definitely pay attention, but you don't have to take notes. I also posted a copy of the film on Canvas. So if you wanted to watch it later or missed something, you could always do that. Let me pause this. So I put some bullets on here, kind of highlighting a few things, and I wrote this up here. They kept talking about a prophylactic station, right? And so prophylactic is what it means is an advanced guard, like a defense against a disease. And this was something that was a huge focus, of the 20th century as we got into some of the wars and things later with the soldiers going overseas, that they would engage in going to these prophylactic stations where they would go and basically get clean or get like antibiotics after having sex as a way to try and prevent social disease or venereal disease, which we would now call like a social or a STI or an STD. So we see a lot of changes over the 20th century, right? A lot of impact of all the different wars, changing gender, changing sexuality. There's just a lot happening, right? And I love that the clitoris or the clitoris was a statue in Greece. Nobody knew about it, right? It was something to be acknowledged in passing, but not dwelled upon, right? And the bicycle and the car, just so different. And we're going to watch part of a much shorter excerpt from a documentary, either next class or the one after, where they talk about some similar things. Again, we've learned so much over time as we get closer and closer to where we are today. And then you saw some of the impacts of things like the sexual revolution and AIDS as we got into the 1980s. And then the internet, you got to love those early chat room portrayals that they have up here, right? So just kind of getting us to where we are today. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions, or anything from the little film that we watched? Anything at all that you were wondering about, or just to make sure? So again, I have some bullets up here from it, but hopefully you found it interesting. You didn't need to take notes, but definitely wanted to put that up there for you since I mentioned it so many times. One thing that's really interesting throughout time, and you see this in the film and then just in general, is the media plays a massive role in sexuality. Now, they showed it in the documentary, but I'm going to show it to you as well. There was a film called The Kiss, right, which was considered absolutely scandalous when it came out. Like, people lined up and would see it over and over and over again. People boycotted this film. People were outraged by this film because it was so dirty and so scandalous that people couldn't handle it, which also made it incredibly popular, as is always the case. But The Kiss, which came out in the late 1800s, was the first thing in the media to really kind of start some sexual reactions. And so I want to play this for you. If anything, it is so awkward, right? Like, it's not scandalous, it's awkward. These two people are like pressed up against each other in the most awkward way. And then they have like a short little kiss and it's over, right? But people would, as they said, spend nickel after nickel. Can you imagine a movie being a nickel? It's so expensive now. I wish it was a nickel. I'd go all the time. So we see this when it comes to like TV, right? Like, what's on TV, what's on Netflix, what's on, in movies, right? What is allowed and not allowed? The ratings of things constantly changing. Educational programs, the internet is massive, right? The internet has absolutely shaped sexuality quite a bit over time. Magazines and advertising. Advertising is shameless when it comes to sexuality. Like, if you just open a magazine right? And look at the images. Half the time there are ads for products and the people are all naked, right? And it's like for a cologne, but there's no cologne anywhere on there, or for pants and no one's wearing them, right? Advertising is used quite a bit to sell products. And we'll look at that more later in the semester. But there's just so much with the media kind of setting the metric of what is normal and acceptable and what we can kind of handle and what's scandalous and what isn't. And this has changed so much over time. And it's just something, again, that we tend to use as like an indicator of what we believe to be normal versus abnormal. And as I said, the internet, which we'll look at more and more throughout the semester too, kind of setting that stage as well. So as we get into like what is normal now, I think we're kind of in a more progressive state, or at least we were maybe 5 years ago, and now we're kind of starting to hit this backlash again, right? So maybe 5 years ago, things were very forward, very progressive. Now we're seeing a lot of kind of legislation and things that are kind of a little bit more backward. But it's interesting, again, with this constant cycle of like progressive, backward, as we move through time. And so what we'll look at next time as we finish chapter 1 here, next class we'll start chapter 2, which is looking at sexuality research. So we're going to look at some of the famous sex researchers like Kinsey and Masters and Johnson. And then we'll actually do a little bit of sex research as well, which can be kind of fun, I think. We'll see what you think, if it's fun or not. But I'm going to stop here for today so I can take attendance one more time. I'll take it today and Wednesday. And then next week, I'll just hand around an attendance sheet, so we won't have to do that anymore. But I'll stop here. Any questions or thoughts or anything? Sorry, I forgot to check before I let you pack up and take attendance.
It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because my mom was born in 1931. Okay. And so 1958, she was only 18, 60s, she was in college, and her teaching me about sex is so awkward. Yeah. Just, it was a book. Let me read you this book. It's like, and it was titled How Babies Are Made.
How babies are made.
So that's it.
Yeah, right. What else would you have sex except to have babies, right? That was so normal at the time. And it was so much a product of that generation to read it from a book. Or give the book to your kids to read, right? Which was something that was also common. The Joy of Sex was like this huge sex manual that came out in like the 1980s that was so popular to like, you would just leave it out and hope your kids found it to look at on their own. Like, we weren't going to talk about it. Here's the book, right? And again, now the internet, like half the time, like, oh, my daughter, so funny, like, and I probably will say this again later, but my 11-year-old daughter is like, she knows everything about the internet, right? Like, because of YouTube. Like, if we don't know the answer, she's like, I'll just find it on YouTube. And her class last year in 5th grade started talking about sexuality for the first time. And I don't know how it happened, but she thought that sex was the same as the Sir Francis Drake, like the explorer. She came home and we learned about Sir Francis Drake at school today. And like, I know all about like sexuality now. And I'm like, I don't understand the connection, Sir Francis Drake. And she's like, oh yeah, he was a huge like sex guy. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, I don't get it, right? So now in our house, every time we talk about sexuality, we're like, are we talking about Sir Francis Drake? It's like this weird like inside joke that I still don't understand. Right. But it's so